So hi, welcome to the reality of joining IATSE, pros and cons with me. I'm Jacquelyn. Probably guessed that. So I graduated from Ithaca last May with a degree in cinema and photography. And this past January, I joined IATSE Local 700 on the East Coast, which is the Motion Picture Editors Guild. And I am an assistant sound editor. That's my classification. As you probably saw in the email, I worked on Blue Bloods this past season, the last final season. And I've also worked on some features like Kung Fu Panda 4 and Screamboat. But prior to being in the Editors Guild, I didn't really work in post-production. And that is in regard to both like college projects as well as internships. I mostly produced and did location sound recording in college. And then for internships, it was a lot of actually development in social media and then distribution at Disney. But then the closest I got was working on Kung Fu Panda 4 as an intern, but that was a production management internship. So I was not an artist, nor was I in the technical areas. So weird that I ended up here, but here I am. I'm a freelancer and I still do work outside of post-production sound. Um, like previously, like this past year, I've worked on Screamboat where I was a production assistant. I still produce short films on the side, and I've recently worked as a location sound mixer on another short. So you can still do that. Shocker. Um, so how exactly did I end up in MPEG when I don't really have experience working in post-production? So I did do a little bit of post-production in college, but it wasn't like my thing. I was known as a sound person, and when you say that in college film, people just assume you do all of the sound things. I did a little bit. I took a sound editing course as an ACP that was taught by this lovely woman in this picture named Marlena. She was a previous, she taught at IC and then retired to work full-time in the industry because she did both because she's a crazy person and did both while living in Philly and working in New York City and Ithaca. Very hardworking woman. And after applying to jobs for about like 6 months prior to graduation, I was like, it's April. Marlena, do you know anyone who needs like an EA or like a production assistant? And she was like, actually, I need an assistant. And then my brain went, I think we're thinking of two very different types of assistants, but go on, because guess what? I had no job prospects. And then she was like, the strikes are about to start, but like it should happen. It should be happening soon. And then I said, I'm in. So why post-production sound? Again, it was the only job offer I got after applying for so many things for nearly a year, and paid way better. But we'll see how that shakes out when I explain the actual wages. So I had a bit of an interest in post-production sound while in high school too, because some colleges expect you to like know exactly what you want to do in film and what area by the time you apply, which I think is stupid for a 16 to 17-year-old. But there was one school that allowed you to apply for sound design. I was like, sure, I got rejected. And I almost completed an audio production minor, but then said no to all four of the minors that I applied for and said, I'm going to graduate a year early and ended up graduating in dual strikes. So again, you win some, you lose some. So when I actually like got into post-production sound, I wasn't sure if I would like it or like care for it much at all. I was really worried that like it would, I was like, oh, I can kind of do this and then like not, and then move on after I get more experience and be fine with it. It's fine. But then I ended up really falling in love with it. I really, really enjoyed um the process and then finding like just the right sounds and like building that like soundscape and clean like it's so satisfying to clean up like some audio or just like find the exact right timing for something. And maybe that's just me being a little nervous spicy in the brain, but like it I found a lot of joy in it. um so what is an assistant sound editor? Because that's my main job. Don't worry, I didn't know this position existed until July of last year. So my main thing on Blue Bloods, it varies across broadcast TV features and streaming media. So here's like the job description. So my main thing was creating the assembly for sound editors and re-recording mixer for the turnover. So basically what that means is I get picture lock, and then I have to take all the picture things and then make it make sense for Pro Tools, because Avid and Pro Tool, Media Composer and Pro Tools, two different things. And sometimes Pro Tools gets fussy. If you've ever worked in all of these people who are in post-production, you know that things don't like working for you sometimes. Also, picture editors work with just one track of audio, basically. And then you have to take it and expand it into all the microphones. And then sometimes it gets out of sync. And my thing is to make sure it's in sync so that they know, like, okay, this is where everything is. So that's expanding and syncing production tracks, creating a background map for the effects editor, and then organizing all the tracks and media, transferring files, and making sure that everything has the metadata and information that people need. And then because I was working on a broadcast TV show, that typically has an actual picture lock. If you're working on a feature, picture edits and sound are working simultaneously. So you'd have to conform sessions normally if you're working on a different thing. And Pro Tools is indeed a tool. Thank you, Eric. Conforming sessions to a new picture edit, you'd have to do that for all the editors. So this way they have the same session and then can continue with their work. Assistants might also find alternates for dialogue to avoid ADR, because studios hate paying for extra things. Recording temps, I helped, while at Warner Bros. Sound, I helped record temps for some other projects that were going on. And then also searching for sound effects in libraries, because people, when you're working with massive projects, it's easier for someone else to do work. I'm also the master of the archival server. I like to think of, I forgot to mention this at the top of the slide. I'd like to think of assistant sound editing as you are part production assistant, like an office assistant, and part sound editor. And so this part is when the production assistant part comes into play, because everyone has their own hard drives and a lot of people are working remotely. I was working in New York City, other people were working in New Jersey, Philly, Westchester, Long Island. So in terms of backups, you have to have all the media. Like, other people are going to have their own backups, but if something needs to be sent to a vendor, say the ADR vendor, because our ADR was sometimes done in Philly, New York City, but our Foley team was in the UK. So you gotta be able to send everybody everything. So ensuring files, assets, and paperwork are backed up, and it's easy to be found if when that time comes when you need to send stuff over or send deliverables. And I realized I didn't. Sorry, I'm getting texts, and I was like, I need to turn everything on D&D. So you'll also sometimes attend ADR sessions and mix reviews, and then you might need to take notes. You might, because they're like, oh, how many takes was that? How many tracks were we recording? Were we doing this? Or like someone might have to step out. And then other administrative and editorial tasks as needed. So my main job for Blue Bloods, at least, was the top bullet point and then the bottom bullet point. So for me, I also got to edit M&E tracks. That means music and effects tracks, meaning all the English is taken out because it's for streaming deliverables to be redubbed and mixed. That's typically done by a dialogue or effects editor, but because broadcast TV has such quick turnarounds, you only really get, the sound team gets about a week and a half for it. The picture team gets 2 to 3 weeks on it. That's not a lot of time to edit, mix, and then also do the M&E tracks. So then when an episode is already mixed, I got to do that because there wasn't enough time for like me to look for alternates, like the dialogue and ADR editors just did that. So that's what an assistant sound editor does. Here's some transferable skills. Granted, I do have like some background in production management and post-production, but you honestly, all the things that I learned for my job was on the job. Like before this, I had about 2% knowledge and experience with Pro Tools in terms of like how much I know now, and I still don't know a lot. So prior to this job, I actually had not touched Pro Tools for about a year before starting. So that was intimidating. Major thing in all of filmmaking, but especially in post-production, attention to detail. The amount of attention to detail of like, oh, this sound by this like little track that you use as a temp or that you shoehorned in for a piece is actually from 3 episodes ago. And I have to catch that out of the 100 something plus sound files that I have. Lots of asset and file management of like keeping everything organized and having everyone be on the same like file naming and organization and being able to find that really, really quickly. And have it be navigate like not just you understand it, but everyone else understanding it. And ownership to mistakes and willingness to learn and solve the problem. That is a major thing that Marlena told me, like, is one of the reasons why she, when I reached out to her, she was like, I'm gonna offer this job to Jacquelyn because when for an assignment, I messed up the setup of the entire Pro Tool session for my team. And I immediately was like, oh no, do we have to redo all of this? Let me look into all the solutions. And that's a major, major thing. If something, you can't be like, oh, whose fault is it? Da 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 da. Just own up to it, figure out how to solve it, and then move on. That's just how it goes. I have a decent amount of like time to like research and problem solve. So like take that time to learn more about um um not only Pro Tools and the different plugins and how everything works, but like why do people need this? What are different shortcuts you can take? Um, how does the routing work now that's all digital because you're not physically looking at like wires to patch in. You just see the in and out on Pro Tools. Communication and timeliness, because there will be times where things are running late and you have to work really, really efficiently and be like, hey, this is coming later than normal, especially since for us, we had a Foley team in the UK. So that 5 hour difference, and they're working on multiple shows. Like that same team is working on multiple shows, whereas like the Blue Bloods team for sound in New York is working on just the one show. Like they need to be able to configure when they're recording all that and when they should expect things to come in, um, as well as the time difference. Like, hey, can I get the dialogue editor might be like, hey, can I get act one? So that I have like 5 days to go through the dialogue instead of waiting for the whole episode. Adaptability and willingness to ask questions and take initiative. Something that you'll learn is that you really do have to advocate for yourself once you get out of school because professors are going to be like, oh, how can I help you? What are some difficulties or do you understand this? They're not going to ask that. And the people who I was working with was like it had been years since they had been an assistant sound editor, if they were ever an assistant sound editor. So you kind of have to be like, what is happening? What like for me, I was like, okay, who do I send what deliverables to? Because I don't want to spam someone with things that they don't need. And I accidentally misinterpreted and like left someone off of the deliverable list, in which the Foley team didn't get stuff for 5 episodes, which was over a month. And that sucks. And the thing is, they had my Ithaca email, which I do not check anymore because I have my own professional film one. Highly recommend y'all make your own professional film emails, because don't rely on your school emails. And so that was very annoying. Um, have you had any luck with people mentoring or guiding you? I have to say, Isaac, who's the mixer, who was a 2013 grad on Blue Blood, 2013 IC grad, and he's the mixer and effects editor on Blue Bloods, as well as Marlena, are great. Like they really took me under their wing. And Marlena also connected me with a few other Ithaca grads who are also a sound, like dialogue editors or assistant sound editors. And so they were really great resources to start out and like ask questions. There was also where I was working when I was in person and in the studio, um, there was like the assistant's room at Warner Bros. Sound where everyone was working on a different project, but they had been working in sound for 8 to 10 years. So I was able to ask questions and people were very, very kind, but they're not going to know you need help unless you advocate for yourself, is basically what I'm saying. Like people are willing to help, but you need to be like, hey, what is that shortcut that you just used? What do they mean by this? What is this acronym? Like I had to like shamelessly like Google like, okay, what is M&E tracks? Like da 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 da. Like what are things that I didn't know prior? Um, is there any questions about that before I go on to being actually in a union? I know that most people aren't sound people here, but I might as well try. Um, Otherwise, joining a union. What is that like? I'm actually literally going to go to the MPEG website, in which for post-production, there are multiple unions. I'm part of the Editors Guild. That does not include animators or VFX artists, which I didn't learn that VFX artists and VFX editors are two different things till this year. So just so you know, if you are in the path for VFX or animation, those are different unions. So there's the Editors Guild, which covers colorists, sound people, music editors, picture editors, VFX editors, animation editors, and ironically, story analysts. Those work in development and help write coverage. Then there's the VFX union, and there's TAG, the Animation Guild. So that's why when people say like, oh, like VFX and animators haven't been like are just recently unionized, that's why, because they're in different unions. They're all under IATSE, but they are different locals and guilds. So for joining a union, it is different across coasts. So I literally take you to the MPEG website, which is editorsguild.com. Very creative naming, guys. So West Coast requirements. So for me, I'm an assistant editor. They just put sound in there. For the West Coast, you need 100 days of non-union work experience, which I did not have. This is for the West Coast. You also have to get paperwork, and you have to have paperwork to prove that you have done 100 days of non-union work at this specific classification. You also have to go to an orientation, and you also have to be on the roster, which is only a West Coast thing, which basically is like, have you done your safety courses, your anti-harassment stuff? The East Coast is kind of just very different. And also you have to pay. On the East Coast, we're going to go to that now. You just have to prove you live here and you got to pay them money. That's literally it. And also have a job on a union project, because don't join the union unless you're not going to get actual union hours and don't pay them money that you don't need to. So yeah, very, very different across the two coasts, just as a FYI for anybody. And the West Coast is basically California, and the East Coast is the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state. However, there are people in like Chicago, Atlanta, other areas who are also in the union. I don't know how it works for that. Don't ask me. I'm new to this. I joined 10 months ago. So joining a union, the qualifications: work for a union studio or post house, obviously. And then the initiation fees, which are in the thousands. I will say, starting at my job, I dropped I also did not have Pro Tools because I leached off of the Park School during my time at Ithaca. So I didn't have Pro Tools, didn't have professional headphones, and had to pay initiation fees. So it is expensive to join a union. But what are the pros and cons? Eric, you were totally right. They probably just consider themselves on whichever coast, or there might be specific contracts within those cities, I guess. So pros and cons. I listed some of the pros that MPEG lists on their website. Do I know how they get access to some of those? Not exactly. So some of the pros: clearly better wages. They have to pay you. There's a specific minimum wage for each classification, and for all of them, there is a weekly guarantee, at least under the New York host agreement. Meaning, if you have 1 day of work, they got to pay you all 40 hours, which is nice because you end up signing a non-compete. So it's like, well, if you only work 1 day, the thing is you're not allowed to work on another project the other days. So some places take advantage. Like one of the people I know at Warner Bros. Sound, he works for Warner Bros. Sound. All the other assistants are contracted for specific projects, but he might be working on 2 different projects, but he consistently gets work. Whereas for me, I was only on Blue Bloods. They pay me for the episode that I was working. And if they have me work 1 day or 5 days, they had to pay me the same. And that's that. Comprehensive healthcare plans and pension plan. So when you're in the union for a year, your pension plan starts up, and you also get healthcare, depending on many hours you get. And the studios pay the contributions. Unlike normal 9 to 5 like office gigs where it's like, oh, they might have to take part of your paycheck out in order to contribute it to your healthcare plan. Nope. the studio's got to pay for that. And then there's also all the fun social things. So like there's private screenings. Like I got to watch Dune 2 at the Tribeca screening room. And you get links to like for your consideration stuff. There's also mixers, panel discussions, networking events, and informational webinars. In one of the webinars, that's where I learned that a VFX editor and a VFX artist are two different things. One of them does temps and marks out where it is, and one of them does the actual VFX work. Well, VFX editing also does VFX work. They do the temps. VFX artists do the finals. There's also a member database and available to work list. So you can search up people within the union. For me, the available to work list has not come out fruitfully because people who are on jobs and can hire people to jobs already know people to fill the positions that they want. So it's not going to be posted to the available to work list and like unless like they're in dire need. And like typically it's like, oh, they're in Massachusetts and they need someone to work as a local, or they're elsewhere and like they're not typically looking for my role. I'll explain that later. They also have assistance in times of need. So say the strikes that were happening, they were able to either comp people for quarterly dues, help people like financially. With the hurricanes that have happened, there's a donation drive in New York City right now, and there is disaster relief funds for people affected by it. These four at the bottom are kind of smaller things that partially I don't know how to get access to. So they say that they have practice facilities which are open for like 2 weekends per month, and you have to sign up a specific place. I have no idea where to access that on the website. That might just be a me problem. They also send a quarterly magazine called Cinemontage, which is like about the post-production world, like what is happening. It has interviews, which is cool. There's also training courses that you can attend. So like there was one recently in the past few months of how to get an assistant like from into the editing chair. So from an assistant editor to a picture editor. That didn't really apply to me, but that can help other people, or how like the Premiere workflow works different from Avid. And they also have a credit union and a credit card, which that I guess that's a benefit. Now to the cons. So I'm literally going to show you what I made for Blue Bloods every week versus and explain to you how that is different from the actual paycheck. So back to the MPEG, wages and contracts. So as I said before, I worked on the New York Majors Amendment. I am an assistant editor. So again, weekly guarantee, which is 40 hours. This is for the new contract. Talk about the new contract later. So weekly guarantee, I made $53 an hour, which for someone coming out of college, that is a very sexy paycheck. All the other jobs that I was applying for were about $20 an hour, sometimes less, which is crazy to me. So it was like $20 to $30 an hour. So that looks very nice. I worked on Blue Bloods from the beginning of January to the end of July, which is about 28 to 30 weeks. However, I was not paid for all of those weeks because I'm only paid for the episodes I work on. You get 1 week per episode. So despite being on a show and signed on to a show with a non-compete for 28 to 30 weeks, I was only there with work to do and with a paycheck for 18 of those weeks because there were 18 episodes. So that shakes out to about 2 to 3 episodes per month. So even though, yes, $53 an hour is very sexy on page, but it ends up being like if I get 2 paychecks in a month, then that's basically the equivalent to being 25 an hour. So still like a pretty good paycheck post grad, but I will say I still live at home and currently am unemployed. So I've been unemployed since July. Pros and cons, pros and cons. So you kind of have to like, when I do have a good gig, I like kind of just hoard and save for the parts when you might not. I've also been to general meetings for MPEG where people were like, yeah, I've been unemployed for like 6 to 8 months now. Or even the mixer that I was working with, after the strikes, he was like, I've been unemployed for 6 months now. I have a pregnant wife and a mortgage to pay and a toddler. So it gets pretty stressful for that. So Jacob, you make 60K a year. I'm telling you, just from Blue Bloods, which was the bulk of my earnings, and I'm currently on an unemployment right now, I have made less than 40. So
No,
Pros and cons.
I made negative $60,000 a year
Oh my God.
because I'm in school.
Oh, that's about how much my loans are currently, to be to be honest.
But I don't have to pay them for until the future, so
I'm currently in repayment and it sucks every time I see that near grand coming out of um my bank account every month, along with quarterly dues for the union. Um, so there's inconsistent work, as I said, unemployed by the union right now, which impacts your health hours. So for at least the East Coast, I don't know if it's the same for West Coast, it probably is the same. In order to start your healthcare, you have to get 600 hours within 6 months, which because I was on a consistent show, that's that worked out well for me. However, in order to get it continuously, you have to continuously get 400 hours. So I got the 600 hours and now I need to reach another 400 by the end of the year, or I have a gap in my healthcare, which I'm not going to get work until next year. So I'm going to have a gap in healthcare. Thankfully, I'm still under 26 and can stay on my parents' healthcare because I live at home. Um, so networking and getting the next job is also difficult. Working in post-production, y'all know what it's like to be in a windowless room all by yourself for hours at a time. That's so good, so good for networking when you're in a gig-based economy. Um, so while there's lots of members, there's not a lot of projects. As I heard previously, people when there were negotiations for the next contract, they were like, I've been unemployed for 6 months. I don't care that you can waive like some of my quarterly dues. I don't have work and can't pay rent. Like that's also another thing. Um, some people have also seen work moving away from the US because of grants. So that could either like actual production is moving to, it could be different states too. Like I know New Mexico and Arizona have had a lot of grants in order to bring business to them for their economies, but also there's a lot of posts. If you look at the post houses that are credited in at the end of the film in the theaters, you'll see a lot that are based in like London, Australia, Korea, France. Um, and now that there's work from home from COVID, that makes networking even harder. Like I met Marlena for the second time um in that picture in the beginning. Like that was like the second time I've ever met Marlena in person. Um, so that makes it a bit harder than it already was. There are assistants in times of need, but it is generally during like strikes that from what I've seen, it's like in big disasters where it's like, oh, like no one in the industry really has work, such as like when there was the dual strike last year, or there's the hurricanes. Um, in terms of right now, like you can like reach out to post houses. I'm again also within 10 months of being in a union, so I'm not, there's definitely resources that I probably am not super privy to. Um, and more cons of like union membership is not all this is I'm speaking from experience of MPEG. Not all locals and guilds are the same. I've heard of people who were in the GRIP union, the G&E union, and they left because they're like, I have never faced more misogyny and sexism than I have in the on union sets as a grip. And working indie in G&E and camera were a lot better. So yeah, that's another thing. So more things about the industry in general. If nobody has questions yet about union membership, I can obviously answer questions at the end. Um, so working on different types of projects. So I worked on a cable series, but I had a bunch of people who were working on streaming shows and features that I asked questions while I was at Warner Bros. Like one person who worked on Madam Web, she worked on that for an entire calendar year and worked on New Year's from 8 a.m. to like 11 p.m. And it would like New Year's Eve, like that was rough. Or so working on features versus cable series versus streaming. My glasses like glitched. Okay. Cable series, again, we had about a week and a half per episode. You are chasing the airing deadline and they need time to get it programmed and to get everything in order. So it's such a tight turnaround that they can't really push a week. And so you do not have much time to work per episode. even if it's like a pretty high budget production like Blue Bloods. Streaming, now that they're streaming, episodes are typically longer. For example, I think it was season 4, whatever season Stranger Things is on. That was like 2 hours long. That is basically a feature, but framed as a TV show. Um, so there are longer timelines, and having worked in the distribution side for Disney streaming, like they have time to push it back. Um, this isn't talking like I'm not gonna mention it really here about how like studios like uh just kill off some of their shows that are already greenlit and made, but because I don't know the inner workings of that. But so streaming, longer episodes, and so episodic for broadcast and for streaming is typically done like for us it would be like 1410, 1411 season and then episode, whereas features, because it's one project, but you're not going to work on all 2 hours at the same time. You're going to break it up. So like if anyone, I'm hoping that I'm not aging myself. I think everyone's around uh, old enough to know that DVDs had those chapters that you can like select and you can start from in the middle of the movie. I hope like my little sister even knows about them. She's 13. So I think it's safe to say that people
Yeah.
everyone here knows it. But basically like those chapters like sequences, like that is what in post sound in post production you would work on. You'd work on, I think they're called reels. I only worked on episodic. So it'd be like sequence 1, sequence 2, sequence 3, or reel 1, reel 2, reel 3 for a feature, and you'd only work on that part. And in features, there's not really picture lock. Picture lock comes when it's released. And even then, that's a lie because apparently in, I think, Madam Web, they like continue to do VFX after they release it in theaters. So, uh, the DVD player was like, I don't know what this disc is. I don't know, man. It's like printers. Printers are so bipolar. They'll just be like, actually, no. And it's like you have one job. You have one job, put ink on paper. Um, so more things about the industry, moving up the ladder. So I heard a lot about this from the other assistants who have been working in the industry for 8 to 10 years. Um, Typically, some post houses have interns. Warner Bros. Sound, no interns. And they also did not hire apprentices. So where I am is technically not even like entry level because typically you would start out as an apprentice or an editing room assistant and then become an assistant sound editor. But assistant sound editors are rarely hired on projects in general. Typically there are AEs in the picture department, but for sound, they don't really want to hire that extra thing unless they actually do have the money. Because again, especially in the union, the studio then has to pay the same amount from your paycheck to also your healthcare and pension plan. So when they hire one person, they have to pay double the paycheck. Um, but that's difficult because as an intern, you train up to be an apprentice. As an apprentice, you train up to be an assistant. An assistant, you train up to be a sound engineer, editor, music editor, Foley artist, and then maybe a re-recording mixer, a supervising sound editor. So when you don't have an apprentice, it's like, how do you train for my position? How do you train to be there when like the networking is really hard, when a project only lasts 3 to 4 months? The next project I'm on is about 6 months. And like for me, like with Blue Bloods, I wasn't in all the time. So sometimes I couldn't ask questions. And there was a lot of lies told to other assistants because they're like in their early 30s and they're the same rank as me. Granted, they have way more experience and knowledge about Pro Tools, but they were told, oh, yeah, you have to be an assistant for 10 years before you can be a sound editor. And that's utter BS because the mixer and effects editor on Blue Bloods is the same age as them. And he started out on he basically was on Blue Bloods from 2 years after graduating college Ithaca and then starting that job as an effects editor. And he got trained up to be the re-recording mixer by the former mixer, and the mixer at the time. So it really depends on like who you're with to train you up to do that coaching and guidance. And I am very fortunate that like there's some people who I've met who have given me advice or like tips and tricks. Um, and advice on certain things. Jacob asked, do you find time for personal projects? I do sometimes. Currently I'm unemployed, and so like I'm writing a script that for a grant that's due this weekend. That's for 100K to like make my own short. Back in February, I was also asked to do another to produce one of my friend's directorial debuts, in which we filmed that in September. But it's not like that pays, like, because we were working, like, for that project, we were working on a budget of like 18 grand. So it's like, that's not a lot to do for like marketing, filming, post-production, festival route and stuff. But I do work on personal projects. Even before I got like this union gig, I helped some friends on like their thesis projects. I'm working on doing post for a thesis project now as a favor to a friend. But again, because one thing is because I don't have actually like a lot of experience in post-production sound professionally, and I didn't build up that portfolio in college. I've had people reach out because I have friends who like refer to me for projects, but I don't have a portfolio in post sound to really show them of like, oh, I sound designed this. The last thing I sound designed that is completed and released was 2 years ago when I had like zero idea what I was doing on Pro Tools and what good sound design sounded like and how to achieve that. So I'm in an awkward position where it's like I kind of have to do like the favors for friends in order to build up that portfolio so I can get the paying jobs, and potentially do those like stretch responsibilities to like edit on a thing or mix for a thing. So Nora, if you want to get into audio, should you start learning Pro Tools? I would highly recommend learning Pro Tools because Pro Tools is the industry standard. But if you learn any other DAW, that's digital audio workspace, that could be Audacity. Audacity is free. If your school provides the Adobe suite, um, what's it? What's the audio suite for Adobe? It's Audition. I was like, I know it's something with an A. Um, yeah, Audition, like that also works. They're very, very similar. It's kind of like if you learned Premiere, you can switch over to DaVinci Resolve pretty seamlessly. Um, so there's like you can I would definitely recommend learning Pro Tools and learning like the commands and stuff. Um, and actually I can mention this too. Um, because I was so new and I was doing this on and off for weeks. I made an entire how to be a sound assistant document for myself because I had no idea what I was doing and had to keep referring back to this in order to remind myself what the correct order was and what the correct settings were for each thing. So if anybody wants to know, I can like hit me up privately and I will go through it and be like, this is how I survived and this is what I did. Eric, I can't really send them a thing to Blue Bloods because none of the editing or mixing work was actually done by me. So that would be kind of disingenuous for in that regard in my portfolio. I did the turnovers. I didn't do the actual editing. Um, yeah, and as I said before, networking and getting the next job. So like it's a lot easier to network when you're on a film set and you're there and have some downtime between shots. Whereas like when you're in working from home or working in a windowless room where everyone has their headphones on and is continuously working, that's a bit hard. But I will say the hours are better. We work 40 hours a week instead of our weekly guarantee being like 60 hours a week for people on set. So, but yeah. Um, Future of the industry. I'll go quick because we're rapidly nearing 9 o'clock. So we're still feeling the effects of the WGA and SAG strike, which was very needed, but it made a lot of studios very hesitant, especially since this year IATSE renewed their contract. And so people were like, what if IATSE goes on strike this year? There's almost no possibility of IATSE going on strike because everyone needed work. And so both union members and studios were like, we got to make this work. We got to make this work. So, but because they were really hesitant to greenlight things, work has been pretty slow. And if you don't have a script written or things filmed, then you can't go into post-production. So post-production going into 2025 is going to pick up a bit. But as Juniper said last week in their presentation, it's going to be nowhere near the streaming boom that happened in 2020 because they're all the streaming platforms and production companies are finding that balance of like, how much are we gonna put into streaming services and theaters and such in order to make a profit, but also and have enough people watching it while also having a diverse portfolio that we're putting out every year. I have been hearing that like the blockbuster lineup for 2025 is going to be like there's going to be a lot of movies coming out in summer of 2025. So that means hopefully more post-production jobs. I don't think it's going to be as many as people hope to like get everybody jobs, but gotta stay on that grind. With the new IATSE contract, um, there are it's hard to have a basic contract for so many unions because so the language used for AI and the future of AI in the IATSE contract is very, very vague. It basically says that AI and the likes, so machine learning, cannot um, replace someone's entire job. And that's difficult because, say for me, there's plugins that have used machine learning in their algorithms in order to that I've even used myself that are very helpful. But say for like a first AC, there is algorithms and technology in order to use autofocus for certain things, but like again, you can't replace an entire person's job with that because you also need skill in someone operating it. Basically, it's like we can use machine learning and AI functions, but it cannot replace an entire person's job. It can make it easier and be used as a tool, but someone has to be behind that. Like a person has to be behind that. There was also a thing about problematic work hours and overtime pay because instead of having like a you cannot work past this many hours in a day, um, instead the contract said if you're working past 16 hours in a day, you get triple time. Huh? So instead of just pushing the schedule back a week and having people paid for an extra week, you'd rather have people work more than 16 hours in a day. That rubbed people the wrong way. Because I like even for onset, I think that the standard should be 8 to 10 hours, not 12 hours, because it's ridiculous when for me, like I have an hour and a half commute into the city. So it's ridiculous if you have people who have to like travel in for like the mix and stuff. Um, it's it's problematic. So filming and post-production moving overseas, I touched on this already. So it's already like in other countries, it is also slow from what I've been hearing. But you will notice that like because of remote work, work is moving to other areas. Um, but there have been people who said like, oh, if I can't get work here, I'm gonna go into the trades, like a G&E person going into electrician work. So sometimes you might just have to stick it out. And there's also grants and work visas to work in other countries like the UK. Like I know there's specifically one for young people who work in film, TV, and entertainment for London in the UK. So hey, I guess like if you ever want to try that out, I'm young, I guess, but because of AI, like I use a lot of automation in my work already, so I would not be surprised if my current role as an assistant sound editor what is dissolved basically in 5 to 10 years. If either those responsibilities are moved to another person because it's gotten so efficient with the tools that we have and the technology that we have, because another thing I didn't bring up is there's a thing for sound people called SoundFlow where people can write automation and like write their own code with GUIs. So like with shortcuts so that you don't actually need to know like Python or C++ or like HTML to like write it out. Um, and so you can write your own shortcuts for your own workflow. And there are people who are editors and work in the film industry and make their own programs and code. So that things are just going to get more and more efficient. And so people just might not pay for like my job might just end up being more on the sound editors themselves and they'll get an extra week of pay and then I like my job just won't exist. So there's that too. Um, that's kind of it. If there's anything that I didn't reach, questions? Um, and that's my that's my contact information if anybody is interested in more post sound or has extra questions that goes beyond people's ability to stay here the whole time. So Okay, Jacob is asking, when do you feel constricted sometime having to stay at positions you might not feel entirely connected to as you move upwards in the corporate ladder? Um, what do you mean by that? Like within sound?
Yeah, you were talking about how sometimes you move up from, production assistant to assistant to this person to, finally doing something that's like a higher level kind of work. And I'm wondering if as you go through those stages, you end up kind of being like feeling like, okay, for 3 years I have to be a production assistant or something, or whatever that translates to in sound. Do you ever feel like, this is like not exactly what I was aiming for and feel just kind of like stuck or feeling like this is not what I necessarily wanted to do. But I have to go through it to get to where I want, but is it frustrating along the way?
I I've I personally don't feel that way. I don't feel that frustrated, but I have heard of people who have been told like, oh, you have to be in this position for X amount of years in order to do this. And I have to say, like the job responsibilities for an assistant sound editor versus sound editor versus a re-recording mixer are pretty different, that I don't think that that's necessary. You just need someone who will teach you or give you those opportunities to work on that. So, like, say the re-recording mixer for Blue Bloods, he told me how the previous re-recording mixer, as he was an effects editor, would give him a shot at like, oh, you get to mix this act for this episode, and then we'll go over it together. And so it's opportunity, people like that and opportunities like that to give you a shot at like actually working on something and getting your hands dirty to move up. Personally, I don't, I feel pretty fulfilled because I know that there's like people who want to work with me for short films, even if I'm not getting paid for it. Because again, I live at home, I live with my parents, so I don't have to worry about rent. So, and other expenses like that. So I don't feel like financially obligated to like make a bunch of money to be financially independent just yet. Um, and I am also on other projects on crew for like as I said, this past year I've been a producer, a UPM, a key production assistant, and a sound recording a location mixer. So I don't feel like I'm being unfulfilled creatively or like stuck necessarily at my job. Whereas I feel like in other, if I were to work like an actual 9 to 6, like outside of the industry, like in an office, I feel like I felt that like I felt that way as an intern at Disney. Like I wanted to gouge my eyes out. I was like, this stuff is so boring. I'm not creatively fulfilled, and this is like actually frustrating how many of these like meetings could have been an email. Um, so I don't know if that necessarily answered your question, Jacob.
Yeah, sometimes I just worry going into the industry that I'm gonna be stuck in these positions for like years that don't really like fulfill exactly what my motivation is. Like I want to direct films, I want to do things that are like much more creative. And sometimes I worry that I'm gonna spend so much time doing kind of like maybe busy work along the way. And I just worry that it's going to be very unpleasant sometimes to have to like climb this corporate ladder to get to that point that I want to be at.
Gotcha. I would say starting small on like a smaller project. So the project I was producing for a friend, that was because of a grant program she applied to. She got $5,000 to get started on a film, and then that was like a mentorship project as well. Um, in order to like get started and like have that feels for her directorial short film debut. And so I would definitely look into stuff like that. I know in New York City, there's a lot of training programs. So I know that there's media makers through RealWorks, and that's specifically for people who are like 18 to 26 who want to who are either went to college or are in college for film or are transitioning into film. I know that there's some places that also have training programs specifically for different entry level positions in the union. So there's one for like camera loader or like If you want to be an AD to join the DGA, like there's the DGA AD training program through the DGA where like you'll get the hours in order to join the DGA. Like there's one for New York, there's one for LA for that. There's other grant programs like the one that I'm doing is funded by Indeed to give 10 filmmakers 100K to make a short film, a 10-minute short film about work and the future of work and just like basically anything that's like tangential to it. So that's a thing that definitely grant programs and different opportunities like that. Um, I know someone in LA who is part of a writing fellowship through CAPE, which is specific that program specifically for Asian Americans. But there's definitely a lot of different training programs to get into the industry and like to also get your hands dirty. Maybe your friends apply for stuff and then they bring you on. So there's that. Sophia is asking, do you feel like there are opportunities for aspiring sound designers to break into the industry? Your circumstances were obviously very unique, but what tips do you have for someone who wants to go into sound post grad? Um, if any friend has shot something, work on doing little soundscapes, like cinepones, basically. I know that's what one of the professors at Ithaca called it for cinematography stuff, but like sound poems of like making those little soundscapes and having a bit of a portfolio. Um, if you don't have friends who are already working on something that you can help out on, or to like build that up. Having that is really helpful. Like one of my friends was able to be a sound designer for commercials, like almost right out of college. Because she signed to a post house that was doing that, and she's now sound designing out in, I think somewhere in Pennsylvania. Um, and it might be boring at the start, but like doing commercials, doing like sound design is actually in so many different things. Like I had a friend who used to do a narrative podcast where it was basically an audio only film. That's something that you can do. Um, what's forgot another thing. Or like there's so many companies that actually do hire for sound designing outside of film. There's someone from Ithaca who recently followed me on Instagram, and um, she does commercials and gaming for sound design. And she got a nomination from the Motion Picture Sound Editors um, Collective for working on Call of Duty for sound effects. So that like there are different avenues to like get into. So you can one of the assignments that we did at Ithaca was taking a trailer that was edited by a student for a feature film. I got Annabelle. I'm not a horror person. And took away all the sound and we had to build it up from the ground up. That was re-recording all the dialogue, doing all the sound, finding music, like finding all the effects, including bone cracking and skin stretching, which was interesting to say the least. So definitely just getting your hands dirty on anything that you can try. Just be like, this is my reimagination of this trailer. This is how I would have done it. Um, Nora asks, your bio said you worked with DreamWorks. Would you recommend working with them? How do you get the opportunity to work with them? I got real lucky in a lot of parts of my career so far. That was because another IC grad, a TVR graduate actually, I happened to have done an Instagram takeover for Ithaca College, and it was seen by someone who works at DreamWorks who happened to be an Ithaca College grad. And she is the director of artistic management. She's now the senior director of artistic management, which was exactly the place that like the internships that I applied for, which was production management. And she was like, "Hey, you seem really, really hardworking and really into animation." Because at the time I also had an animation minor. You should apply for DreamWorks because they just opened their internship applications and they're due next week. And I was like, oh, when someone DMs you that, you don't say no. And she passed on my resume to HR and got my foot in the door. And then I got to interview, and that was like my interviews was basically all me, but she got my foot in the door. So very, very lucky, but I have heard of other people from Ithaca and other schools like working for them. Like it's not impossible. Um, they were really, really great. I worked remotely. So that was also another thing. It's not like I could ask about like the in-house engineers for sound. Um, I was in Ithaca. They're based in Glendale. So I loved working at DreamWorks. They are an amazing company to work for. Um, they really do take care of their interns. Anyone who is planning on having an intern in their department, they train those people and of like, how do you structure an internship for someone? How do you do this? Um, they give a lot of opportunities for interns. Um, so they're great, but and they have a really beautiful campus. Shannon's right. I got to visit last November, which is actually ironically when the actor strike ended, and I also got the call for Blue Bloods. It was like that week. Like I was on the plane when I heard that the strike ended. But I got to visit their quarters. Oh my God, their campus is gorgeous and it's so pretty. Um, so yeah, if you have an opportunity to like apply for an internship or if you are ever in LA and you want to apply for them, highly recommend. I still have friends who work there and went back. And um, they do try their best to like hire back interns. The timing just didn't work out for me. And then I was too scared to move to LA without a job, even though most people I know have done that. Um, yeah, lots of networking to get into jobs though, of like people who like will actually refer to you with jobs. Brandon asked, do you have any advice for learning aspects of sound editing in Pro Tools before graduation? I'm currently in audio production, ACP sound editing. Um, the thing about learning it in college is that the way that audio production is set up is that you do all of it yourself and they don't really teach you what the step-by-step process is between turnover, then how do you structure it for editing, then how do you structure your Pro Tools session for mixing. Um, it's very watered down because it's geared towards the fact that you're going to be working on student film sets where they expect you to do literally everything. Um, so again, if you want, I can show you eventually like what my set, like what the full Pro Tools setups looked like and how they routed it and like what like plugins to look out for. Um, it's I would say really, really refining your ear and learning what good sound sounds like. Because I still don't have it, and I was really worried about it of like like I would sit in on ADR sessions and they'd be like, I heard a bump or a fuzz. And I was like, I didn't hear that at all. And I have much younger ears than other folks who are in those sessions. And so it's really learning like how good audio sounds like and what bad audio sounds like and like what okay-ish audio sounds like. Um, and how to clean that up. So definitely training your ear, definitely attention to detail in terms of like file management. Um, and really thinking about like how to fill it out because I feel like a lot of student projects tend to be very empty and you'd be surprised by how many tracks are in an episode, are in like a clip. Because in one scene of Blue Bloods, I'm pretty sure most sessions are like 50 tracks at least because there's like 5 tracks for just backgrounds. There's like a 10 for sound effects and footsteps and Foley, a bunch for ADR, for background. Like there are so many different ways to fill out a scene and not make it feel empty, but it's really big about like having it there and then mixing it correctly so it works out. Um, um, Jacob asks, does each studio have its own Pro Tools pipeline? You can also like, once I'm done with the question, you can also like raise your hand and like pop out. It feels really weird just speaking into a void. Does each studio have its own Pro Tools pipeline and practices, or is it fairly consistent across the board? I've only worked on one project, but from what I've heard, it is a case-by-case basis based off the people you work with rather than the post staffs you work with. Because I already made the how to be an assistant thing, so then Warner Bros. Just asked for that for if they were to hire like a really green assistant. Um, but every pipeline is different. One person told me a horror story where it was a mix session with the director and producers there, and the supervising sound editor gave her a list of like these tracks need to be colored this exact way, and it was like a whole thing. And she got one thing wrong, and she got berated in front of everyone, and she was crying, like silently crying as she's driving the session in front of the producer and director and having to fix different things because she just made that one mistake. My team, they don't really care what color any of the tracks are. They're just like, as long as it's different, as long as it's ordered in like a consistent way each time, they're really they're really chill with it. But it really depends on who you work with because I've heard there are many uptight people or like bigots or like just rude people in the industry, and you just gotta learn how to deal with that. Jacob's got his hands raised. What's up?
Um, so the mentality of people like Steve Albini or some stuff people sometimes say that like a lot of stuff is kind of over produced to the extent that like reverb and compression are added to like everything and there's like a loudness problem that goes on. I'm wondering what your take on that is.
Um, I will say the dynamic range is absolutely messy now because it'll sound great in a surround sound theater, but then on your when most things are made for streaming now, and you have to like raise the volume or lower the volume, and things are just horribly mixed, or not horribly mixed, but the dynamic range is just off because there's so many. Um, how do I explain this? Okay, so Vox did a really good video on this. So at any point in time, because of the cocktail effect, does everyone know what the cocktail effect is? It's basically like in a crowded room, you can single out the person in front of you. You can only pay attention to one sound at a time. And so when you're listening from speakers, that's you can only focus on those speakers. And so you as the mixer and as the editor, you have to like basically engineer the cocktail effect for the audience. So if there's a really big boom and then there's people hiding and they're whispering, that's going to be a massive dramatic range. And you still need to account for music and the other sound effects and backgrounds. And so things just keep getting louder and louder, which ends up peaking. Like I've seen it where I'm just like, I don't agree with the mixing right now, where it's like, I feel like this is a little loud. Um, and so that I will say, like, I think there is a mixing problem of like dealing with dynamic range, because you have to make things still audible and soft, but then you have to make all the big things actually sound really big. I think one thing that did it really well, it was an average movie, but Fly Me to the Moon, whenever they had like the rockets take off, they made it sound big and grand without it being loud. And I think they really played very well into like the subwoofers and the very low end to make it feel in your chest really loud and really grand without it physically just being in your face loud. And that's hard to do because understanding how to mix that and how and what frequencies to use is hard. It's like if you were to like make something sound really, really stale. Like how do you make something sound stale but not empty? And but not stale and empty, but not like there's silence. It's different things like that. So, so,
Cool.
so, um, all right. I was just looking at the chat and it seems like it did hit 9. So, but is there any other questions? I can, of course, if you look me up on Instagram, you'll find me. If you have any other additional questions. What's up, Brendan?
Very specific question, but since you mentioned that you did a trailer for Annabelle for one of your sound classes, do you have just any lessons that you learned on that? Just because I have to do my trailer just in a couple weeks.
Gotcha. Screams are really hard to record because we had screams and that was hard. We also had only 4 women in the class, and all of that Annabelle creation was about little girls in an orphanage. And it was really hard to get friends, so I played, and none of the other women in the class had a convincing enough young girl voice that was like sub 10, so I played like half of them. So that was really rough. So, um, if you can get the trailer with the least amount of people, because the other group had Scott Pilgrim, and that trailer that the student edited had, because there's 7 evil exes and there's so many different characters, it was so hard for them to like record that in a convincing manner. But it's really really fun to direct ADR. um so Thanks, August. I won't be staying unemployed for much longer. I do have a job lined up for January, February, but don't know when that's gonna start. And I don't know if I can.
Yay. Well,
Wait,
I
are we
wish
still?
you the best.
All right. Hope you have you're doing your thesis right now, right?
I just wrapped.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you.
Um, but yeah, for the trailer thing, if you can, like one person really does need to organize like and be the coordinator of everything of like when everything goes. And there ends up being just like one mixer at the end. So just be cognizant of that and be on the same page with people like try and work with people you know like will get it done because you're working with like half the class with like 6 people on one project and everyone's got a different timeline. So um it's mainly working with people like you can really, really trust. Hayden, what's up?
Um, I'm gonna go back to the union stuff just because that's my wheelhouse.
Go for it.
But the first and most basic question I have is, since joining the union, do you feel better protected and slash or represented? Because especially as a woman and a woman of color in this field, like you said, it's you are a minority in the fullest sense. So is it succeeding in the role that it is was, established to do?
Um, Considering I work in post-production, I don't think I've really encountered that many people generally, but I will say that where I worked was very white, was very male. But there were like some of the other assistants were also women of color, so that was very helpful. And they've like told me like their experience and how they've handled that. Um, Projected in terms of like job, it's very hard, but it's also like at least I know I have a qualification to get into jobs and someone who will like oh, that's another thing I forgot to mention. Knowing who hires you. For me, that's a supervising sound editor. So even though I know a mixer and I know people who edit, they might not have the power to hire. But for me, the person who hired me onto Blue Bloods was the supervising sound editor, and they have the hiring power. Meaning, if anyone ever mistreated me on that project or talked down to me, she would have my back, and I know that for a fact. Whereas, like, if say someone's super established, I know someone who worked for a mixer who was incredibly racist to her, and made like they were very established in their career, and they were working on a very, very big title that all of you knew and was a massive social media craze. And like she couldn't really say anything because, well, she could have easily reported him to the guild, which I've never had experience with, but she could have done that. But it's not like that would stop him from getting jobs. He has Oscars, he's got MPSE awards. Like there is no way that people wouldn't hire him because he has decades long of having experience, and it wouldn't stop him from getting jobs, but it might have gotten like a light scolding or warning. But I don't, to my knowledge, she didn't do anything about it. But um, fortunately, I have been very, even in my internships, most of my colleagues were women. Most of my higher ups were women, women of color. And so I haven't really faced that type of discrimination, even in college and even in internships. So I'm very grateful for that. So in terms of protection, I think I'm pretty sure you can probably report it because that'd be absolute BS. Or I could have also reported to say like the office managers within Warner Bros. Sound if I ever experienced that within Warner Bros. With people who weren't part of my project. But for the most part, people are very kind from what I've experienced, and those people who have been cruel to people I've met, those people are outliers in terms of their cruelty. Jacob, you have so many questions. I love this.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but Jacob is not afraid to ask questions when you're talking about like just putting yourself out there to coworkers who've been there longer and asking questions. Jacob definitely seeks out the
Which is
answer.
great because
Yeah.
like I found myself being like, oh, I don't, like, they would ask, oh, do you have any questions? And I'm like, I don't know, like, what am I supposed to say to that? And eventually it would just take time of just like me compiling a list of questions and like bringing it up as it goes on. Like, what are you switching as you're like, when you put in new mixing and like you're like, are you like, and you're taping it? And because I didn't do mixing, I've never been in a Dolby Atmos mix stage before then. So just asking questions as they come up. Jay, did you have another question, or did I answer?
No, I was wondering if you feel like sound people in general are sometimes not like respected to the level of some other people in the industry.
Um, in regards to like attitude of like respecting of like how much time we need and resources, 1,000%, we are overlooked in favor of picture. And I think that happens a lot because it'll just be like, for example, like the first episode of Blue Bloods that I worked on, they went a few days past when I was supposed to get it, and it was right around New Year's Eve and like New Year's Day. And so it was a whole thing of like, okay, well, our how are we going to do this when we have to premiere this in February and we need to get it coded in and then also work on the next few episodes. So they typically get more time than us. They like picture editors get a higher wage than sound editors. That's like a different classification from sound editor. Um, they typically get like even from facilities, like I like compared to like the sound stage that I worked at versus like the finishing facilities that I've seen from other places, like they just get it better, but mostly in terms of like time and resources, they get more because, for example, yes, it takes longer for them to sound edit, and for them it's 3 weeks. For us, it's 1 to 2 weeks. But they had three assistant editors. I was the only assistant sound editor. They had 3 to 4 picture editors, and we had one sound team and they worked on every single episode. So in
Yeah,
terms of resources, yeah, but they also like they do a lot in terms of like putting in notes and markers for when we need ADR and like the mixes for Blue Bloods. The directors weren't there. It was the post producer. It wasn't even the showrunner because they sit on what is on all the reviews for picture edit so that they can end up relaying it to us. So they do a lot of work in that sense because they put in temp effects and music for us to get an idea so that we don't have to go asking the showrunner and the director as they're doing the next episode. Um,
yeah,
for
I just see sound as a huge part of the film, and it a lot of workers that are not, the big, it's a big show of it and it's invisible, quote unquote, don't get kind of the respect they deserve. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Eric, as time goes on with tech getting better, it will, like as I said, like my job might not really exist to the capacity that it is right now. Um, where typically sometimes there's even there's days where it's words are a thing. There's some productions where like the assistant sound editor is only on every other week. I've seen that for some of my friends. Um, so yeah, they might just be hired less or like given even less time to do things. So it's just really rough, really rough. So like my job might be folded into someone else's responsibilities, but the same amount of work is still expected to be done. So, any other questions, or are we down to just chill and chat?
Thanks, Jacquelyn. This has been great.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I also want to mention that Jacquelyn kind of like started coming to these meetings after she discovered post-production. So I don't know. I don't know if you want to quickly talk about that as an ender, but like
Oh yeah, like if for all
how
the
this community, like what do you as a sound person get out of this community and that kind of stuff.
it's really nice to hear from other areas of production because like yes, I hear like yes, there's webinars and stuff from the union of different areas, but like the union doesn't represent VFX artists, and like that's an area where like especially since I did work at DreamWorks as in some form of animation, like that was really cool to see. And so like it's really great to hear that, especially on a level of like I'm not always hired in a union job. So like hearing it on the freelance side and hearing areas like we've recently had stuff about podcasting. We've had people come in talk about like starting their own organization in companies and business and working different areas of freelance. So that was that was really enlightening as someone who like is still really, really new from college. And I think one of my first Park Post meetings was about a year ago, with Juniper, who they they had their presentation again last week, but that was about unions and state of the industry with the strike. And so that was really, really nice to know like, oh, like there's other postgrads who are also in the union, but also like struggling too. And yeah, I wish I knew about this when I was a student, because this would have been a great way to join. But I think I joined like after I graduated or like just at the tail end of my senior year. Because I remember getting the emails, but I don't like that. But the earliest presentation I recall is Juniper's from last year. So highly recommend if any parkies just found out about this, highly recommend staying and signing up for the weekly emails. Our last meeting for the semester is next week, right before the election, and whatever chaos that may bring. So yeah, highly
Like I
recommend.
gave you a script, like
Oh no, I like when I emailed the professors and like organizations that I know about, I was like, and don't forget to sign up for this. They're on Tuesdays on Zoom exclusively every week. You should join. I was just like, here's like a whole thing. Because I was like, if you didn't know what Park Post is, this is a very good resource. And it's like great to join. Um, not just for this webinar, but for the other meetings as well.
we're happy to have you. And the more you participate, maybe you will also get asked to do a presentation. But we have one more meeting, as Jacquelyn said, next week. We are going to play a game next week. We're gamifying Park Post.
Yes.
So we're gonna talk about reality competition shows again, but we're gonna play a game. So
Sweet.
we're turning that into our own competition reality show. Maybe we'll have SUP against Park Post.
Oh my goodness.
Love it.
Cool. Thank you again,
Thank-
Jacquelyn. That was awesome.
Yes.
We need more sound people.
Especially women in sound. Let's go.